Hi guys, and welcome to the Is It Worth It for the Type 97 Tiki, the Tier 2 Japanese Premium Light Tank. This was a tank that was given out free by Wargaming for their 16th anniversary, so as a result, a lot of you probably have this tank in your garage, or have probably sold it in order to get a free garage slot. But as it was a free tank given out by Wargaming, like all the other light tanks that were given out for free, it is not available from the tech tree or from the gift shop. But also, like all the premium tanks that Wargaming have given out for free, I have no doubts that it will eventually appear in the gift shop for sale as part of a package. And the question we're going to ask today is, if the Tiki appears in the gift shop in future, is it going to be worth picking up? So, as per usual, we're going to start with the history of the tank, and the Type 97 Tiki has quite a lot of history. I was quite surprised because I hadn't heard of this tank before Wargaming introduced it into the game, but it does have a lot of history. It was first designed and put into mass production in 1938 and remained in production right up till 1945. There were a few variants of this tank, and the variant we have in-game is the Type 97 Tiki. Basically, this is the version of the tank that came with a 37mm gun, which is quite a punchy gun, and it was quite a good gun when it first went into service around 1938 or 1939. So it performed quite well on the Japanese Western Front against Russian tanks like the BT series, but later on in the war, when it was facing American tanks, it didn't do quite so well. It is very, very lightly armored, and even high caliber machine guns had no problems penetrating it, so it meant that there were quite a few variations of the Tiki, and its role changed throughout the war. So in the late 1930s, it was used as a combat tank, infantry support tank, and reconnaissance vehicle. In the early 1940s, unfortunately, due to production issues, the gun was replaced with a 7.7mm machine gun, and it was mainly used for reconnaissance rather than combat. And late in the war, when it was struggling against most enemy armor it was coming up against, it was converted with a trailer and used simply for ammunition resupply. So there were quite a few variants of the Tiki, but it did remain in service right up till 1945. It was originally designed as a light tank, as a reconnaissance tank, so this thing was designed from the ground up as a scout, and it makes a pretty good scout in game, so I guess that is historically accurate. Now, there are a lot of tier 2 light premium tanks in the game. Unfortunately, most of them are quite rare, and most of them were given out as gifts, so the only one that is currently available is the T2 light tank, which is available from the tech tree or from the gift shop. But as the Tiki is a gift, and most of these tanks were also gifts, it is a very, very good comparison. If we start with the hit points, you'll see that it has 160 hit points, which is very, very good. It is significantly higher than most of the other tier 2 premium light tanks. It matches the T1E6 and the Micromouse, but it really does have quite a lot of hit points for a tier 2 premium. When we take a look at the weight, you'll see that it comes in, for me, just over 5 tons, which makes it the lightest of all the tier 2 light premium tanks. And in a light tank, that's usually good, assuming, of course, that you have a decent engine. Unfortunately, the first major downside to the Tiki is it only has a 65 horsepower engine, which is significantly worse than all of the other tier 2 premium tanks. The 6C doesn't have a great engine, but it's still much more powerful than the Tikis, and even the Micromouse has a more powerful engine. So as far as the power to weight ratio goes, it may be the lightest tank, but it also has a really, really bad engine, and it makes the tank quite sluggish when it first starts to accelerate. Where the engine power, or the horsepower to weight ratio, which is only about 13.2, where it really, really hurts the tank, is in exactly the same place as most other Japanese tanks, and that is going uphill. You really, really do miss that engine power when you're trying to go uphill, and your speed slows significantly when you're going up even small rises. The speed limit was also very, very disappointing. It's got a 42 km/h speed limit. Now you can reach that speed quite easily on the flat or downhill, but it is significantly worse than most of the other tanks. In fact, the only tank that is slower than the Tiki is the Micro Mouse, and it's not that much slower. 37 km/h versus 42. So it is pretty slow. It's got a really, really poor horsepower to weight ratio, and it struggles going up hills. But having said that, it's still not that bad. The traverse, or the ground resistance, the terrain resistance on this tank seems to be quite good. And as I say, when you're going along flat ground or downhill, really the tank was quicker than I was expecting. And the only time it really, really annoys me is when it needs to go uphill. The traverse speed, again, is probably right in the middle. 44 degrees per second hull traverse is okay. It's worse than some of the others, but it's equal or better than some of the others. And really the traverse speed doesn't hurt it that much because of the playstyle you need to use when you're playing the Tiki, but we're going to get into that a little bit later on. The turret traverse speed is not fantastic. In fact, it is quite poor. Now, 36 degrees is quite fast, but compared to the other Tier 2 light tanks, it is quite poor. It is beaten by most of the other tanks, with the exception of the T7 combat car, and equals the turret traverse speed of the Light 6C. But again, it doesn't hurt the tank that much due to its playstyle. It's not terrible, but it's not great either. And now we come to a couple of real strengths for the Tiki, which are its view range and signal range. Its view range is 300 meters. Now that may not seem great, but it's at Tier 2, and 300 meters at Tier 2 is very, very good. It is significantly higher than the Tetrarch, the T2 Light, or the T1 E6 and T7 combat car. It matches the Mark 6C, and it is worse than the Micro Mouse, but 300 meters of view range is very, very good for a Tier 2 light tank. The signal range is not fantastic, but 400 meters of signal range, again at Tier 2, is pretty good. It is much better than most of the other Tier 2 premium light tanks. The Tetrarch and the Micro Mouse have it beaten, but 400 is not bad. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the armor or taking you into Tank Viewer or anything like that, because the Tiki has no armor. Basically, if you look along here, you'll see that the Tiki has the worst frontal armor. It's got really, really bad side armor, and it's got really, really bad rear armor. It does beat a couple of tanks in places, but not by very much. And yeah, it's just got no armor. Now, one thing the stats don't show you is one really, really big positive for the Tiki. On paper, this tank does not look great, but it has a lot of positives that aren't on paper. And the first big positive that isn't included in what I've shown you so far is the size of this tank. This tank is tiny. Let's compare it to the Tetrarch, which is a very, very small tank. You can see that the Tetrarch is a very small tank, but the Tiki is much smaller. T7 combat car, look how big that is compared to the Tiki. Even the Light 6C, which is a very, very small tank, is bigger than the Tiki. So the Tiki is a very, very small tank, and that makes it a much harder target to hit from distance. But the other really, really nice thing that is not shown about the Tiki is, and you can see it here, the size of that turret. It's got a tiny turret, which is a good and a bad thing. The size of the turret means that it can be very, very hard to hit, especially when it goes hull down. But it has a really, really small turret. Look at the size of some of these turrets. And then compare it to the size of the turret on the Tiki, and it is a really, really small turret. Besides its size, the Tiki also has a very, very good gun. It's another positive for the tank. It is a very, very punchy 37mm. This is the same gun that you get on Tier 2 on the Hago for the Japanese, but it is better in every way. It's got a very nice rate of fire of 20 rounds a minute, so you can pump out shots very, very quickly in this tank. The tank doesn't get special matchmaking. It will see Tier 3s, but this gun can handle every single tier 2 it comes up against and most tier 3s because it has 40 millimeters of penetration with its regular AP and 59 millimeters of penetration with its premium ammo. So the penetration on the gun is pretty good. The alpha damage is also very, very good at 45. So it's got a fast rate of fire, decent penetration, and decent alpha damage. It's a very, very punchy gun, and it doesn't stop there because its accuracy is also pretty good for a tier 2. 0.4 is not great at higher tiers, but at tier 2, 0.4 accuracy is very, very good. Possibly one of the things that lets the tank down is its aim time. With a slower firing gun, this is a great aim time. 2.2 is a pretty good aim time, but for a fast firing gun, the aim time does let it down a little bit. But this gun means you don't have to fear very many tanks on the battlefield, and even those nasty, nasty T-18 at tier 2 are going to fall victim to this gun. Another thing the stats don't tell you is a big positive for the tank, and that is that the Tiki has absolutely phenomenal gun depression. It has 13 degrees of gun depression to the front of the tank, and the news gets even better because it has 15 degrees of gun depression to the sides and 15 degrees of gun depression to the rear. So this has an incredibly punchy gun, a very, very small turret, and amazing gun depression. And that means that you can fight on ridges, you can fight on rises, you can use small undulations in the ground and hide behind them much better than you could in any other tank. It is one of the major features on how you need to play this tank well. Use its tiny size, use its tiny turret, and use its amazing gun depression. Okay folks, time for some Tiki gameplay to cover basically everything I've been talking about in the review regarding the tank so far, and also a couple of things I forget to mention in the rest of the review. This is the last footage I'm actually recording for the review, and while watching this game I suddenly remembered a couple of things I haven't mentioned in the review, so I'm going to mention them now. The Tiki, another positive for the Tiki, is it has absolutely amazing camo value, and I don't think I mentioned it, but it also has very, very, very good terrain resistance. Basically, this tank can travel over rough terrain very, very well. But anyway, we are here on Malinovka, and I do mention it in a couple of videos, and Malinovka is broken. Even at tier 2, when enemy tanks can advance down the 1-2 lines and get into the K3 position, the map is just broken, and thankfully it's going to be changed to 9.4, but that's going to be months away. Usually when the enemy team get tanks down into K3, the team in the south loses, and that's exactly what happens in this particular game. But don't let it take away from the rest of the Tiki gameplay. So we're just going to go, and we're going to look at the engine power. We can see that it's quite sluggish to accelerate, but once it gets up to its top speed, I'm going downhill here, I'm at top speed, it maintains its top speed very, very well. We're going over some rough ground here, and you can see I'm still maintaining my speed, still doing around 40, 41, 42 kilometers an hour, and I'm moving into position. So what I haven't mentioned is that the camo rating on this tank is fantastic. I have mentioned the view range, but you can see that the engine and the speed of the tank aren't that bad. Going up that slight slope, I lose 20 kilometers an hour, so going uphill will cause you to lose speed. But we're already putting our camo rating, we're putting our view range into action. I'm going to let my binocs kick in and let the spots commence. So even though we've already got tanks down in K3, the enemy team pretty much are just going to keep advancing down there and end up winning the game. But in the meantime, you could see that, like in real life, where the Tiki was a reconnaissance tank, it is an extremely good scout. It's got the view range, it's got the signal range. It may not be the fastest tank, but it's not slow, and it does have the speed to get into positions. So we're just doing our passive spotting thing here, getting assistance damage, and it is very tempting to shoot. So the other thing I want to point out about this replay is that there's an enemy Tiki. There's C. Bartels in his Tiki, the only other Tiki. He is currently unspotted, and he causes me some problems later on in the game. And he basically remains unspotted for this entire game and yet manages to get 4 kills. I believe he is sitting in D4. At least that's where I think he starts shooting me from. But he basically gets 4 kills and remains unspotted for the entire game. So the Tiki does have very good camo rating. So in the meantime, we can't dig out. We're having major problems digging out the enemy tanks out of K3. And that's going to come back and cost us the game. My teammates are having major problems hitting this M2 light I'm spotting. So I finally lose patience and go for a double bush shot and bounce on the rear of an M2 light. That shot goes low again because that long aim time. I hit, unfortunately, the gun barrel of the PZ2 and miss a kill on the M2 light. But now I've reversed back down the slope. I'm using this gun depression. Bushes have gone solid. I'm just opening up fire. Sometimes the tank, or the gun on the tank, will let you down. But I think I only bounced one shot there and got unlucky with the other shot that was going to hit the M2 light. So I haven't been spotted. I've moved back up into the bush. Going to let my binocs kick in again and let the spots commence. So, go for another shot. M2 light is angled, bounce, but finally manage a kill. And I still haven't been spotted. You can see that the camo rating is very, very good. And that the gun is pretty punchy. So, mistimed that shot long distance on the T18. That shot might have gone in, don't know. But the aim time does hurt this tank a little bit. It does take quite a while to aim. And now we're about to enter a period of frustrating play. Because the enemy team are still dug in K3. And even though we've got 5 tanks down there against a solitary T18, he's basically going to end up spotting and getting all 5 of those tanks killed. So I decide to move forward because I'm not getting spots. No one is shooting what I am spotting. And now I'm going to use the 15 degrees of gun depression to the rear of my tank. You can see me reversing down this slope. I'm reversing and firing backwards. And someone's just taken a shot at me. And the enemy Tiki has spotted me. I've just been spotted by the enemy Tiki, and I'm running for it. So the Tiki has just shot me from, I think, D2, D3. But yeah, that enemy Tiki, he gets 4 kills. He stays undetected for the entire game. So I'm in cover. Going to try and push the bush again. And enemy tanks are still advancing. And you can see I'm able to get some nice shots into that Sheeny at distance. Mistime that one. And that shot goes low. So 0.4 accuracy. It's definitely better than most tanks at tier 2. But you can see that the rate of fire is very, very good. Aim time not so good. And that flaming Tiki has just spotted me again. So his rate of fire is very good. Now I'm taking fire from multiple tanks. And the downside to the Tiki, it's just not fast enough to get away. And you have no armor. So I haven't bounced a single shot yet. Every shot that's hit me has gone in. Even a machine gun at range is penning me. Machine gun at range from the PZ2, and every one of those shots has penned me. Haven't bounced a single shot because this tank has no armor. So there we go. Enemy team won the south because they pushed down into K3, and the game is pretty much over there. But that was not a good replay, I'll admit that, but it pretty much shows exactly what I was talking about regarding the Tiki. This tank has amazing camo value. It's a good scout, it's got great view range, decent signal range. The engine is not as bad as people say. It has really good terrain resistance, and the gun is pretty punchy, although at distance sometimes it can let you down and the aim time is not the best. I really do think the Tiki is a fantastic scout or a fantastic sniper if you want to play it more passively, but you've got to remember, just like in this replay, I took 15 hits and all 15 of those hits penned and did damage. You've got 0 armor. Now, it may have a small turret, and that may be a big positive because it's a very small target, but it is also quite a big negative when it comes to its crew. The crew layout is quite poor because this is a micro tank. In real life, this tank isn't much bigger than the standard family car. It only has 2 crew members, and with a small crew, it means that the commander also happens to be your gunner, your radio operator, and your loader. So he's got 4 different duties, and he happens to sit in the turret. So if you do get shot in the turret, even though it's a small target, you're going to be losing your commander, your radio operator, your gunner, and your loader, which can be quite frustrating. But what it also means is it's not a very good crew trainer. In fact, it's a terrible crew trainer for most Japanese tanks. So let's talk about equipment, and there are very few equipment choices for the Tiki. This is it. And we're just going to kick off with the toolbox. I don't think a toolbox is worth it on a Tiki. You don't have the hit points, you don't have the armor, and usually if you start getting shot at, you're going to die so quickly. There's going to be no time to repair any tracks. So I don't think a toolbox is worth putting on the tank, but if you've got a spare equipment slot and a spare toolbox, it's not going to hurt you. An enhanced gun laying drive is a very viable option. Because of your fast rate of fire of 20 rounds a minute, and because of the relatively slow aim time as a result of that 20 rounds a minute, an enhanced gun laying drive will help this tank. I decided not to go for it simply because of my playstyle, but a gun laying drive is a very good equipment choice for a Tiki. Coated optics are another viable choice for this tank. It's got 300 meters of view range, and coated optics, if you want to keep this tank on the move, are viable. Unfortunately, I tend not to go for coated optics because of my playstyle. I have more successful games in this tank playing it quite passively or as a scout, so I decided to go for binocs over coated optics for that very reason. But like I say, coated optics are a viable option. Binocs are also a viable option. It all depends on how you decide to play the tank. A camo net, again, is a viable option. I've gone for a camo net because I play this more like a scout or a sniper, and I just find binocs and camo net work out better for me. Light spall liner, complete waste of time on this tank. Anything that's going to be firing HE at you is going to pen, is going to do full damage, so I don't think it's worth putting a spall liner on it. And improved vents is always a decent choice. It will boost your view range, it will boost the performance of your crew skills by 5%, and I will try and put it on as many tanks as I can. Okay folks, it is time for the overview game, a game where I show you as many strengths and weaknesses of whatever tank I'm reviewing in one replay, and we are here on Mines, and we are just going to go. So it's a nice matchup, it's an all tier 2 game. And you can see already that the acceleration is quite poor. And because we're going up a slight rise, I'm struggling to get to my top speed, and you can see that most of the tanks on my team are faster than I am. And again, it's just a slight rise, but we are struggling to accelerate. We're actually losing speed on some parts of this rise. So going uphill is this tank's biggest problem. You can see, turning the corner. If the enemy team had advanced on the hill aggressively, I would never have made it up here. I'm down to 19 kilometers. I'm just going to pause it there, because not only am I slow going up the hill, but you can see how small the Tiki is compared to other tanks. It is a really small tank. But I'm on the hill, and now there is no tank that's more dangerous than a Tiki when it gets into a position where I can use bushes for cover and snipe, put its gun and gun depression to use. So I'm using its gun depression, probably could have pulled back further, But we're just going to start opening up here. And I'm having no problems putting shots in, and all of a sudden people are shooting me, and I'm going, what the heck? Where's my camo rating? And I suddenly realize, oh, bugger. Ah, there's a T7 combat car proxy spotting me. There's no way I should have been spotted. I was well back from the bushes, and my camo rating has completely failed. So I have lost all my health. I've bounced, actually managed to bounce a couple of shots from a T2 medium, but that was at distance. But everything else that shot at me penned me. This tank has absolutely no armor. I am down to almost no health. I have 9 hit points left. And the enemy team are still shooting the bush. I'm probably risking a lot here by pushing. You can see that they're still blind firing the bush I was behind. And it's one of those situations where you're wondering, okay, now I'm going to have to play really, really passively, but that's how you play the tank anyway. You really do need to play the Tiki quite passively. But one simple mistake, and I just did not have the armor. I got absolutely annihilated because I got proxy spotted. But again, I'm using this amazing 13 degrees of frontal gun depression. I'm able to barely show my tank over the edge. And the gun is good enough to snipe a shot into the T2 light. So PZ2 has been spotted. Again, I spotted the PZ2 with my binocs, and we're able to go to work. T18, very dangerous tank, and again, I'm not being spotted here, but go for the weak upper front plate on the T18. No problems penning him. That shot goes a little bit low, and that shot goes really, really wide. The accuracy isn't fantastic, but we do take out the T18. But as I say, accuracy not fantastic when you're sniping at long range, but it's still good enough. As you can see, we take out the Lloyd gun carrier. And now I want to get some revenge on this Panzerjäger, who put 2 shots into me. So we get another nice shot in. Mistime that one. Think I hit something in front of him. But take him out for kill number 4. This is where this tank is just so strong. If you're not scouting, if you're not in a scouting bush and spotting tanks for your team, it is such a strong sniper. So get a lovely shot into that Cruiser 2. Unfortunately, mistimed that shot, and I'm aiming really, really badly. Don't know why I was aiming so badly. And because I was aiming so badly, I missed my kill shot. That was a really, really bad aim. Now I go for a blind shot on that bush because I reckon that's where the enemy tank is hiding, and we hit and set him on fire. So he's burning to death, and unfortunately someone else nicks the kill. But that pretty much sums up the Tiki. So that was another ace tanker in the Tiki, and that replay I think pretty much sums up the tank. The acceleration at the beginning of the game was slow. It was struggling to get uphill. Even a slight uphill rise meant I was actually struggling to accelerate and even decelerating at some stages. Once I got onto the steeper hill, the speed really, really dropped off, and if the enemy team had been more aggressive, I wouldn't have made it to the top of the hill. I came first on damage and first on XP with 4 kills. Again, you can see, compared to the rest of my team, you can see how quickly the Tiki can deal out damage. It's a very, very good gun. It can take on pretty much any other tier 2 frontally, as long as you aim at something like a T18's weak spots, and it can take on a lot of tier 3s. It's a very, very good gun with a very, very nice rate of fire, and you can deal out damage. It does lack a little bit of accuracy at range, but it's still more than good enough for tier 2. On the other hand, you have no armor, and when you get shot at, more than likely those shots are going to pen. I got hit 7 times, lost pretty much all of my health. The only 2 shots I bounced were from a machine gun at extreme range. The view range and signal range are fantastic. Even though I was late to the party and got up to the top of the hill very, very late, I still managed to spot 6 tanks. I still damaged 7 and I still destroyed 4. So the Tiki is a very good scout, and it is a very, very good sniper. And even though it's only a tier 2 premium tank, it still makes quite a lot of credits. It still earned me over 19,000 credits, which is pretty good for a tier 2. Okay folks, time to sum up. Should the Tiki appear in the gift shop in future? Is it going to be worth picking up as part of a special bundle? Well, on paper, the Tiki is a pretty disappointing tank. It's got a heck of a lot of negatives. It's a terrible crew trainer. It only has 2 crew members, and because it only has 2 crew members, it means that the commander also happens to be the gunner, the loader, and the radio operator. And the commander happens to sit in the turret, so shots to the turret will absolutely cripple the tank. Big negatives. And the negatives don't stop there. It has absolutely no armor, so anything shooting at it is going to penetrate, is going to do damage, is going to destroy modules because it's a small tank, and is going to kill crew members. It's got a really bad engine, so even though it's a very light tank, it's got a terrible engine and pretty poor horsepower to weight ratio, so it doesn't accelerate particularly quickly. And even though it doesn't accelerate quickly, it also has a very low top speed. At 42 kilometers an hour, it is definitely one of the slowest tier 2 light premium tanks. However, I was quite surprised with the performance of the tank. Even though on paper it's not great, it's slow, it's got poor horsepower to weight ratio, the only time the poor engine power has hurt me, or I notice it significantly, is when I'm trying to go up slopes or go up hills. But other than that, it's a big negative, but it didn't hurt the tank as much as I was expecting. The hull traverse and the turret traverse speed are not fantastic either, but they're not that bad. They are workable and very average. Now, when I sat down to play this tank for the review, I wasn't expecting to enjoy it quite so much. It ended up performing much better than I was expecting. On paper, its stats are not very good, but this tank does have a lot of positives, and a lot of those positives are hidden and not shown in the stats. So we'll start off with its hit points. Its hit points are very good. It means that you can take 1 or 2 more shots than you normally would in other tier 2 light premium tanks. Its view range is very good. Its signal range is good, not very good, but it's still pretty good. The engine, even though bad, performed better than I was expecting. The armor, even though it has none, actually did better than I was expecting. But the small size of this tank means that the armor isn't as important. It's a very small tank, it's a very hard target to hit, and it's got a tiny turret, which also makes it very difficult to hit. The gun is extremely punchy. It's got a fast rate of fire, it's accurate, and even though the aim time is not the best, it's okay, providing you can fit equipment and have a decent crew. And the gun means you don't need to fear most tanks you're going to be facing. The gun is more than good enough for every single tier 2 in the game and most tier 3s. The gun is very good. But in addition to having a very good gun, it has amazing gun depression, so it's a very small target with a very small turret, amazing gun depression, and a punchy gun. It makes it a very viable scout. It makes it a very good ridge warrior. It can fight on slopes, it can fight on hills. It may have a little bit of trouble accelerating to the top of those hills. It can also use terrain features to its advantage, small terrain features that most other tanks can't use. This tank just had so many positives that were not shown in its stats that basically when you play it like a scout and a sniper, the tank performs really well, even though on paper it's not a good tank. So if you're a tank collector, you're probably going to want this tank anyway if you don't already own it, and in that case it's probably worth it. Now, I think there are better low tier premium tanks you can buy. Certainly there are a lot of better tier 3 premium tanks you can buy, but as far as free gifts given out as tier 2 premium tanks, the Tiki is actually a lot better than I was expecting. As I say, if you understand its weaknesses and can play it to its strengths, it is actually a pretty good tank. I wouldn't rush out to buy one though. As I say, it's a terrible crew trainer, but it is not a bad tank. So if you were planning to pick up a bundle because it had a Tiki, it's probably not worth it. But if you were going to pick up a bundle anyway, and the Tiki was included, go for it, because as I say, I enjoyed this tank a heck of a lot more than I was expecting to. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.